In partnership with parents and the community, Birmingham Public Schools will provide educational excellence that empowers students to cultivate their individual brilliance and positively impact the world.
Good evening and welcome to the Board of Education meeting. Tonight is Tuesday, June 18th, and this is the Birmingham Board of Education meeting. Our first order of business is roll call. Tracy?
Trustee Zammit?
Here.
Trustee McKinney? Trustee Hokemer?
Here.
Trustee Rass?
Here.
Trustee Ajamouni?
Present.
Trustee Spencer?
Here.
Trustee Joseph?
Thank you, Tracy. And if Trustee Spencer would read our vision and board norms.
Sure. The board vision is that all students in Birmingham will realize their full potential, think critically, and champion an innovative tomorrow. Our board norms that we've decided on as a group are to be respectful and reflective, be prepared, no surprises, ask questions and seek to understand opinions, assume positive intent, and understand and respect the role of each other as trustees.
Thank you, Trustee Spencer. And at this time, I'd like to turn the meeting over to Dr. Roberson for recognitions.
So during this time of year, we don't usually have a student recognitions because the school year has ended. But I'd like to do two recognitions as this is the last regular board meeting for two of my colleagues. First colleague I would like to recognize is Dean Neforos. Dean Neforos is the Assistant Superintendent of Human Resources who has served Birmingham Public Schools for over 8 years. During this time, he has brought a historical knowledge to the administrative leadership team, and now that his wife is retired, he is going to spend more time with her and explore new HR opportunities. And so at this point, I would like us to wish Dean Neforos the best. I don't know if you want to say any words, sir. You don't have to.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Certainly bittersweet, but this is a wonderful district, and I wish everybody much success going forward. And I'll certainly keep an eye on things and how things continue to progress here, because I know everybody will continue to do very good things here for the community and the students in this district. So thank you.
Thank you. I also would like to take this opportunity to honor and thank my colleague and friend Laura Mahler, Executive Director of Specialized Services. Laura has been with the Birmingham Public Schools for over 37 years and has been an educator for 41 years. She has brought a sense of calm and steadiness to the special education department, and before her current role, she's worked as the principal at West Maple, and she also started her career at Seaholm High School. So, Laura, we absolutely thank you for your service, and we want you to know that you truly will be missed.
Thank you, Dr. Roberson, for those kind words. It's really, truly been my pleasure to be of service to the students and staff and families in this district over these past many years. Being an educator is really who I am. I was one of those kids that always knew I wanted to be a teacher. One of my favorite gifts I remember getting from my parents was a large mobile chalkboard that I put up in our garage, and I made my 5 younger siblings sit in front of it and let me play teacher. I'm pretty sure that wasn't one of their favorite childhood memories, but it was one of mine. And as I've reflected on my time here, I'm just so grateful to the many, many colleagues that I've worked with that have really allowed me to be of service to kids and a success for children. That's really all I ever wanted to do, and I really think that's the only thing that's important for any of us in the work that we do here. So thank you for all the support, all of you, that I've been given over the years, and Birmingham will always be part of my heart. Thank you.
so that ends our recognitions, but I'm going to stay up here because, for the superintendent's report, because we have some special guests in the audience. But I'll let you go to additions and deletions first.
Thank you. Trustees, are there any additions or deletions to tonight's agenda?
I have none.
Dr. Roberson,
Okay,
back to you.
thank you. On today's agenda, you will see the conferring of the graduates at Groves and Seahorn. We did have a beautiful ceremony for both schools at Meadowbrook. The day held out perfect in terms of the weather, even though it poured raining the day before, so we were happy that everything was dried up. But want to commend both Dr. Smith and Principal Wicker and their entire staff for putting on a very beautiful graduation ceremony. So I want to share that. Also on our agenda, on our consent agenda, you will see the hiring of Derby Principal Jack Gittler. And if I can have Jack Gittler come up, please. So we are pleased to announce that Mr. Jack Gittler will be recommended today on the consent agenda as the new principal of Derby Middle School. For the last 2 years, Mr. Gittler has been serving as principal of Rogers Elementary in Berkeley schools. Previously, he served for 10 years in the Byron Center Public Schools as principal, assistant principal, and athletic director. Mr. Gittler began his career in education as a teacher in North Charleston, South Carolina, and also taught in Hudsonville, Michigan. He holds a Bachelor of Science in Education and a Master's of Educational Leadership, both from Western Michigan University, and he's currently working on his doctorate in educational leadership, also from Western. So we would please give Mr. Gittler a warm welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Roberson, Board of Education. With your approval, I'm very excited just to be here and just to step into Derby Middle School as a principal and get to work with the amazing staff and students and families there, all the great people who I've already been in touch with at Derby and all the great families. So I'm just really excited for this opportunity. I'm excited to be back in a middle school opportunity and working with the students there who need very specific support that I can offer them, and working with the staff of seeing that we're giving the students their best opportunity to move forward as they get ready to move to high school as well. Thank you.
I would also like to take this opportunity to introduce our new Pembroke principal. Now, her appointment was already on the consent agenda, I believe, in May. But if I can have Mrs. Colleen Hoyne come up, please. So Mrs. Hoyne is the new principal of Pembroke Elementary School, succeeding Susan Crocker, who is retiring at the end of this school year. Mrs. Hoyne has served as principal of Eagle Elementary in Wisconsin since 2020. She previously served as the associate principal of a high school and an instructional coach at the middle school level, all in Wisconsin. She is a native Michigander, is moving back here. She holds a Bachelor of Elementary Education from Michigan State and a Master's of Educational Leadership from Carroll University. Let's give Colleen a warm welcome.
Thank you so much. I appreciate everybody being flexible as I move, and I was, hoping for the opportunity, obviously, in May, but excited to be here tonight with you, and just want to thank you for the opportunity to serve the Pembroke community and the larger Birmingham community in the time that I've had to meet some of the Pembroke staff and some of the parents and families. It is evident that they have built a culture of learning and a culture of passion for students, and I'm really excited to be a part of that, and just want to thank you for the opportunity to serve Birmingham and the Pembroke community.
And we're excited to have both of them join. We also have in our audience our Deputy Superintendent, Corey Heitch. Has not officially started, but has been in the office quite a bit, so we appreciate having him here as well. Also on the agenda today, we will be looking at the budget. And we're looking at both the ending final budget and the projected budget, which has been shared previously with the Finance Committee. Now, usually we have our budget discussions, the initial one, during a study session, but we actually held off on having this discussion at the study session and had it for tonight because we were hoping to have final numbers from the state regarding our state aid fund. It is kind of akin to creating a household budget and not knowing how much you make, just having an idea, right? And right now, we know we no longer also have ESSER money, so you'll see in this budget that we have some assumptions. The assumptions that we have in the current budget that you'll see this evening is a $241 increase. And that is based on the governor's recommendation. As you know, the governor, the Senate, the House, they all give different recommendations, but that was the governor's recommendation of a $241 increase. We also have made an assumption of no MIPSers retirement funds. You've heard me discuss at previous meetings about the MIPSers money that we are advocating for. It's a joint advocation coming from the Michigan Association of Superintendents Association and Michigan School Boards, the MEA, the AFT, and really lobbying for those funds. We do believe we'll get something. We do not know how much. As of right now, the assumption is there's no money in the current budget because we don't have anything definitive. You'll also see in the budget reductions. And one of the things that we do every year is that we look at efficiencies. So where are the parts of our organization that we need to do to be able to live into whatever the projected enrollment is going to be, and also our current status of what we think the budget's going to be. And we look at those efficiencies and we make those efficiency recommendations. There's also in here, in addition to efficiency, some difficult decisions that we have had to make. And these difficult decisions are things that we have done not necessarily because of efficiencies, some because of efficiencies, but some because we have to live into what the board has required, which is our strategic plan, and our community has required, which says that we will have a structural, sound budget. Some of those difficult decisions we've had to make was a reduction of middle school librarians, elementary reading specialists, paraprofessionals, EAC position, reduction of hours for CSOs, reduction of high-dosage tutoring, reduction of student support coaches, reduction of supply budgets, subscriptions, et cetera. If we had infinite amount of resources, these would not be discussion, but when we have a finite amount of resources, we have to make some priority decisions. And in doing so, some of the things that we prioritized and added into the budget was 2 additional kindergarten classrooms so that they could be less than 20, because they were currently sitting at 25 students, and also currently a 3rd grade classroom that was over what we would normally expect. So I share that because we value our employees and our programming, but we've been asked to live into our strategic plan with the goal being having a balanced budget by 2027. We've had several meetings in the last few months where we have been asked to make a plan that we have shared with the board. And this plan, again, was prioritizing mitigating the impact, direct impact on students. So I just want to share that for the entire board. We have had several discussions, and the specifics to the actual dollar amounts that are in the budget right now have been seen by the Finance Committee, but will be shared for the entire board with a vote hoping for next week, at next week's board meeting. The next thing that I want to share is, and And this came on Monday in my email box, which is why it wasn't initially on the agenda, and it is about the Alumni Pathway Project. I believe that some information was sent to you about the Alumni Pathway Project. And what this is Oakland Schools has shared with all of the Oakland County superintendents that they would like to create a partnership with a company called Lightcast to find out where our students not only attend school, but after they graduate from college, what careers they are entering into and what part of the country. It also gets their information and their email addresses so that we can see how our students have fared beyond the K-12 experience. This pathway project will allow us to make sure that as we're preparing students for their future, that they are going into, what careers they're going into, and give us additional information and hopefully contact so we can see if they felt well prepared for industry, for college and for industry. This will be at no cost to our school district, but what they are asking us is the permission to share the student data with Oakland Schools, and Oakland Schools would share that student data with Lightcast. I'm bringing it to your attention now because there has to be an intergovernmental agreement signed, which we would want to do next week. But I wanted to bring it to your attention because if you have additional questions regarding this over the next week, if you can get those to me, then I can make sure that I have those answers for you from Oakland Schools prior to the vote.
So would that be in a resolution?
It
Or
would-
is it just like an agreement?
It's a contract. They've written up a resolution, which is basically a contract with Oakland Schools, allowing them to enter into this contract with Lightcast on our behalf. Okay? So just sharing that, you don't have to give me an answer or questions tonight, but over the next week, if you can get those, if you have any additional questions, if you can get those to me so that I can make sure that I have those answers for you prior to your vote.
Can I ask one question though?
Mm-hmm.
So is this something students and families opt into?
They would have to opt into. Well, we would send them first of all, we would send them the information, so they wouldn't opt into, like, we would send them a roster of all of our students. So that part, they wouldn't opt into.
Right.
Whether they respond would be based on whether they chose to respond. Yes.
Is this something, this is obviously new for us, is this a new program for them?
They have not entered into this agreement at all as a county before. But it came out of superintendents saying, we need more information about what's happening with our students once they leave our K-12 realm. And so this was an opportunity to kind of follow that trend, see what it looks like for our individual districts, and then them also be able to look at it as a county. Does anybody have any other questions? All right. That ends my superintendent report. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Roberson. Trustees, do we have any board comments or requests at this time?
I just want to share, attending the graduation commencement ceremony is always such a special day. And it brings to the front of my mind, and I'm sure I can speak for all trustees, why we are up here, why we are making the decisions we do, and always keeping the best interest of students first, of kids first. And it was a beautiful ceremony. I had a son graduating, so it was even a little bit more special for me. But it's something where we wish our children at a 97 or 98 higher education enrollment from Birmingham, the very best. I mean, that's a pretty amazing statistic. Not many districts can give you that percent. Was it 97 or 98% of our population go on to higher education? That's pretty amazing, and I'm very, very proud of our students, and I'm very proud of our staff for preparing them so well for their futures.
No, just on behalf of the Government Relations Committee, we do have 2 new trustees who were elected to the Oakland School Board. So they have 5 trustees, and Mark Katz retained his seat, and Carol Finkelstein was elected to the open seat. So that happened 2 weeks ago. 2.
And that's both who we supported.
Yes, yes.
Trustees comment?
Yep, I have a few things. So since our last regular meeting, Trustee McKinney and I attended our last Athletic Advisory Committee meeting. I gave Mark final comments on the coaches guide. So you might remember we spent the year finalizing all our handbooks, coaches, booster guidance, parent-student athletic guide. And I was going to recommend to the committee in the coming year to review all the final handbooks just to make sure there's no internal inconsistencies. We also met our new athletic director at Groves, Ross Gautier. I think it's Gautier. And MHSAA approved 2 new sports, girls field hockey, which we expect to have a combined Grove Seahome team, and boys volleyball, which we actually expect to have multiple teams at both Groves and Seahome. Apparently there's been a lot of interest. We might be able to start both sports as a club sport next year just to get started. We had some more discussions on busing to and from athletic contests. We'd like to be able to do more. Durham consistently says they don't have the drivers. Of course, funding would also have to be discussed. We are discussing some additional options, just brainstorming, but nothing's really been finalized. I also attended both the Groves and Seahome ceremony with all of you, and we attended, Trustee Hokumer and Dr. Roberson and I attended the IA graduation ceremony on June 2nd. So congratulations to all the graduates. 2 more things. I attended the last IA governance meeting of the year. It was last Thursday, June 12th. It was actually a pretty jam-packed meeting. Their sex ed curriculum was approved. I was a parent rep on their advisory board. It was a great experience. All voices were heard and respected, and we worked really well together. And we always kept in mind our mandate of the class, which is to reduce rates of teen pregnancy and rates of sexually transmitted infections. IA is also going to be providing new or additional professional development to help their teachers really get kids excited about being there. They come from all over, and they're really working hard to increase their school, their culture of their community. Rochester requested 10 additional seats and was approved for that. Contract negotiations are coming up, and discussions will start a bit earlier than the last round. A few new courses were approved, DP Global Politics, DP Psychology, and DP Computer Science. Textbooks and materials are being considered for these classes as well as Spanish. There was a lot of discussion about the costs of these things, and Dr. Roberson provided some great advice for places to look. Do you think I missed anything? Okay. All right, and then finally, the Finance Committee met last week to discuss the final budget amendment as well as next year's proposed budget, which of course we'll be hearing about tonight. Amy and I, Trustee Hokumer and I are prepared to answer any questions you might have, along with Mr. Teratuta and Dr. Roberson, of course. You all know I've been pressing to get the balanced budget, or the budget balanced even earlier than fiscal year 2027. I spend a lot of time reviewing the monthly financial statements. I joined the Finance Committee to try and gain a greater understanding of the whole process and to really try and help be part of the solution. Obviously, like you were saying, we still have a lot of work to do, and we'll be continuing our discussions in committee. But after our planning session during April's retreat, subsequent follow-up discussions with Dr. Roberson, as well as our Finance Committee meetings, I can say with confidence that I support the steps our leadership team has already implemented, as well as each idea brought forward for future consideration. Now, I would still like to move faster, but if it is the will of this board to move forward in the manner presented, I'll accept it, knowing the level of thought and consideration went into these decisions. Additionally, Mr. Teratuta has proposed some changes to our financial statements. It will take some time to implement, but it'll increase transparency and make our job even easier as we keep moving forward to balance our budget and increase our equity fund as a percentage of our expenditures. Sorry for the long one tonight, guys.
Thank you.
There's just been a lot going on.
No, thank you, Trustee Coleman. Trustee Spencer?
Sure, thank you. I attended the last PAC meeting, and as it kind of wrapped up for the year. The current parent leader no longer has a child in the district, so they'll be looking for a new leader of that group. And there is also a resolution on the table tonight to approve the appointment for a new representative to the PAC committee for Oakland.
Thank you. I just want to say elections for the BEF Board. Birmingham Education Foundation are next Monday, so we expect to have the same officers as we did last year unless people run against the current slate. And then the BYA had their last meeting of the year last week and looking forward to planning all of their meetings going into the fall. I just want to thank Laura and Dean. It's been a privilege and honor to serve with both of you over the past 5.5 years. So thank you for what you've done for myself personally and our community. It's really appreciated.
Thank you for saying that, John.
Yes, thank you.
And ditto.
With that, if we have no more board comments, we will move into public comment. And I will go ahead and read our public comment card. Because the Birmingham Board of Education values public meetings, not just meetings in public, we welcome public comment on school issues. Most comments can be concisely stated in 3 minutes, and the board respectfully asks that comments remain focused on the topic or issue and not on specific personnel. We welcome your comments but cannot discuss nor debate not on the agenda. When asked to discuss non-agenda items, we can share facts but not engage in discussion. We need to follow laws regarding public notice on issues and be aware that other community members may have interest in the topic but without proper notice may not be present to contribute. With that, I invite Cindy Blakely to the podium.
Good evening. My name is Cindy Blakely. I am the community school organizer at Bingham Farms Elementary. There are 3 of us on Community Ed IMC 3. My older daughter, I have 2 daughters. My older daughter, Lydia, when she was an infant and a toddler, she had an occasional babysitter. And this was a Harlan mom who lived in our neighborhood. She was a room parent as well at Harlan. She would take Lydia as a toddler to Harlan with her children. The kindergarten teacher there saved a seat, a desk for Lydia. She taught her how to use the scissors. I'm not going to say she taught her how to read, but she maybe did. She made her feel welcome as a part of the Harlan community before I ever stepped in the door. When it's time to think about and register for preschool, we had absolutely no doubt in our minds that Harlan was our first and only choice for preschool. This community school organizer at that time, Linda McCormick, told us there were only 3 open spots. My husband got up, went to Harlan at 4 a.m. in a blizzard on a February night in 2004 to be first in line. Turns out he wasn't. There was a dad there in front of him who had twins. We got the 3rd and last spot, and we have been a part of the Birmingham Public Schools community ever since. My principal at Bingham, Joanna McKinney, has told the Bingham staff again and again, it's not about fitting in, it's about belonging. I became the CSO at Bingham because I wanted to be a part of a community. 350-some kids, and I give every student there a birthday sticker on their birthday or before the weekend. And if I don't do it by 9:15 in the morning, you better believe that student is standing in my doorway. It is about celebrating and acknowledging and feeling a part of the community. It is simply about that, and I could not ask for anything more than the Bingham Farms community. Thank you.
I invite Katie Parker. Katie Parker, that's okay.
All right. Hi, everyone. I apologize if I've been yawning. It's just that my 4 BPS students have been home from school for a week, so no offense to anyone here. I'm Katie Parker, and I have the pleasure of serving as the C Home High School Community School Organizer. While I could talk for a really long time about all the great things we did in our school this year, I'll save you from that. But if you're having a tough day and you really want to hear some wins, you know where to find me. From the beginning to the end of the school year, Liz Sack, the CSO at Groves, and I invest many hours into supporting enrollment and retention. From our well-attended open houses where we gathered valuable information from the current prospective families to our on-site 8th grade visits, which built relationships and familiarity for our dragons, wildcats, and cobras. Investing our time into building relationships will pay off when we see them in our halls in the fall, as we know the transition points here are where we lose students at the greatest rates. We spend the entire year meeting, touring, and talking with families who are investing their time and hearts into finding the best school for their child. This is rarely an easy decision for the families we meet. We know that with 13 private schools within our district, we have to work harder than anyone else to build those relationships with parents so they can understand the opportunities and successes that await their student here, so they can entrust their high schoolers' education to Groves and Seaholm. Once these new families are enrolled, we support welcoming and acclimating new students to school. One of the ways we do this is usually by encouraging them to join our service clubs, because it is so accessible to every student and is a warm and welcoming microcosm of our schools. The school-wide club and service opportunities are available and accessible to every single one of our Seaholm and Grove students. Not every high school student is a 4.5 student or a varsity athlete, and it's really important to see those students of all grade levels, backgrounds, academic levels come together to grow, feel valued, and shine while assembling soup kits for the hungry, wrapping gifts for hospitalized children, making hygiene and sensory bags for youth who are experiencing grief and trauma. Through all of these efforts, we have been successful in marketing our schools, gaining enrollments, creating equitable access to extracurricular activities and opportunities for all students, giving authentic engagement to current students, families, and community and alumni, and creating occasions to improve the unity and wellness of our students. So thank you for hearing me.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to invite Cindy Soul to the podium.
Good evening. I'm Cindy Soul. I'm the community school organizer at Greenfield. I've been in that position for 13 years and also at the school for over 24 years. I'm also a proud parent of 3 boys. Both the older ones have graduated from Groves, and the other one, I guess, is now currently a junior, he tells me. So you see, I have a very personal stake in this district. Our specific community ed model was brought to BPS in the 1970s. There was great value seen in the position being in each building to be able to have interactions within those buildings and be able to build relationships with students, families, and staff. We then gather the information that directly impacts students in each of our specific schools and use it to help these students and families better thrive within our schools. Our families want after-school options in elementary. We run our in-school, after-school classes, which served almost 2,800 BPS students this year. Our total profit made for the CSOs on this after-school classes were almost $59,000, which we invest directly back into each school. The strategic plan states that we will generate revenue through viable success. We have shown this success by managing our Community Councils Fund, which is the fund that we were, over 40 years ago, was created. We have done that for over 40 years, and it has never been a part of the general fund. This fund has revenues of in excess of $1.75 million this year. We are self-supporting of 12 CSOs, elementary and secondary, as well as Kids Club staff, preschool teaching teams within all of our 8 buildings. Our Community Council Budget Fund is back to running at a significant surplus. We often carried in the $1 million range of fund equity every year prior to COVID. The strategic plan also states we partner with community organizations to engage families in a reciprocal process that actively supports student learning and well-being. We actively work with our families to find them the resources that they need in times of emergency or just rough times. I have my readers on. Is that one? Thank you. We have helped them navigate the state child care fee system and do work with other community organizations. We are often the first touch point to the buildings when they're coming to us for preschool, as C3 said, or tours. Our students, staff, and families know us because we're a consistent presence in our entire community. We live here, we work here, we vote here, we parent here. We are family and student engagement, and we are the community.
I'd like to invite Amy Voigt to the podium.
That's me.
I'm Amy Voigt, and as of 9 days ago, I retired from teaching for a really long time in Birmingham. Thank you. You're taking my time. And in spite of the fact that a lot of my questions have already been answered, I have a few questions and some thoughts to share about community school organizers in our schools. Are you a prospective family who is interested in touring a Birmingham public school? Perhaps you are a parent whose student is choosing a kindergarten, a middle school between our two excellent high schools, or one of the many private schools in our area. Maybe you just need a lengthy phone call because you have a lot of questions, or you need a mailing that includes a schedule, course descriptions, points of pride, athletics, arts information, and that one piece of paper that pertains to just your child and your child's interests. Would you like your child to be matched with a peer who shares those same interests, activities, and who is really excited about attending Birmingham Public Schools for a whole day? Someone who will then be their ambassador when they are a newly enrolled student. Do you need a tour guide for a visiting dignitary? Perhaps a lieutenant governor, a state senator, an alumnus who's an Olympian, the head of the Rockefeller Foundation, or a Tony Award winner? Would you like that visitor's first impression with staff and students to be a deeply knowledgeable and positive one? Would you like students to be engaged in the community through clubs such as Interact, which is a national organization coordinated through the Rotary Club? Perhaps they could go and sing with, or play games with, or even dance with at a senior prom at a local senior citizens community. Do you need someone to organize a building-wide community service extravaganza to promote goodwill and positive outreach about our district? All of these questions to be answered one way. We need community school organizers in our schools. Thanks.
Thank you. Next, I'd like to invite Ashley Loha.
We already had someone who represent our elementary.
So you're,
Yeah, you can move on.
okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Last would be Melly. Melly, I'm going to pronounce your last. Thank you. Sakakis. Sorry, Melly.
That's okay. I get that all the time.
Hi, I don't think I've done this before. Melanie Zakakis, I work at Community Ed, and I have the pleasure and joy to know every one of the CSOs because I interact with all of them all the time. They are tireless. They know everything. I don't even think I could come up against what Amy just said because that was incredible. But the after-school classes, and keep in mind that in Community Ed, we're answering the phone and talking to the parents who we know are sometimes a little needy, and we are talking to them and helping them register and attend those classes that the kids are so excited about. Even at some of the schools, we have to schedule a live moment for when the classes will go live because there's such competition at a few of the schools to sign up for some of these after-school classes. We have great contractors, we have great programs, we have great athletics. All of these are organized by the community school organizers. Without them being able to schedule these classes, these families will not have these opportunities. It would be impossible for these kids to attend these enrichment activities. And they are enrichment activities. They are not glorified babysitting. They are not latchkey. They are engaged. They're learning projects. They're doing morning dodgeball. They're doing afternoon golf. They're creating art. They're creating music. Without the CSOs, we don't have that. And it would be really sad not to be able to continue to offer the enrichments that encourage our kids to follow more enrichment opportunities as they go up and follow into high school. So, thank you.
I believe we have one more public comment.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Okay.
I invite Pam Lucken to the podium.
Thank you so much. We had some sad news about CSOs, but I have some great news about things that have been happening. As we know, we are definitely in a situation where we have to be careful with the budget. But as we have trimmed down our budgets, we've trimmed down the assistant principals at the school, and then we have also looked at how can we make a difference for our school. So in my 9 years, I've seen changes, and some of these changes have been pretty fun. The number of tours that I have seen at Berkshire have increased 400%. That's insane. People are really looking and shopping and really appreciate that time spent with someone who can talk about the school. It's adorable to see our kids shadowing and our teachers trying to promote, because they know that every student that we have makes a big difference. Some of the things that we have done at the middle school level, I know we've heard about our high school CSOs and our elementary CSOs, is we have really worked on creating some important marketing events. We brought back the open house. We have taken over some of these fifth grade visits that our assistant principals might have done in the past when we had 2 full-time assistant principals. We're taking over some of the, doing a lot of the marketing work that's happening with our social media and engagement and things like that. Taking over a bunch of clubs, and also taking over some other fun programs like the Amazing Shake, and we just put on a giant college and career day. So finding ways to show what is great about Birmingham. I do think it's been a real pleasure of mine to watch this job change over 9 years and try to fit in the needs of our principals, and all of these people do it beautifully. I think it's a steal for the salaries of these people and the amount of work that they do. And I just want to say thank you for letting us letting us do this job as long as we have been able to. And if you could reconsider, we would love it.
Thank you. Next, I invite Catherine Hennick to the stage. Podium. Yes.
Hi, my name is Catherine Henna. I am the registrar at Seaholm High School, and come August, I will be the president of the Secretarial Union. And I just want to thank you all for listening to us tonight, and I want to point out how many secretaries are in the audience. If any secretaries are here, would you please stand up for a quick second? We support our CSOs. We know how vital they are to our community. We know that without them, we could not do the community outreach, the engagement, the selling of our schools to families who come in from out of state or who are looking to potentially leave the private schools, and in this very fierce area that we are for competition. We need somebody who's doing that regularly in the community, saying, Corton's great, Pierce is great, Greenfield's great. Look at the programming we have. Look what we offer that the private schools might not be able to do for you. all right? And without them, the secretaries certainly are not the ones who are going to be able to pick up that slack. We've had experienced cuts in the last few years, whether it's cuts in the secretarial directly, whether it's cuts in administration, whether it's OAs, whether it's TOAs, and now we're going to lose the crisis counselors at the high schools. We are stretched so thin. It's such a fine balance now to ask, like, we know you're going to ask somebody else to pick up the slack. We will degrade the services we currently offer to those families and to the students and families in our buildings now, if we're then asked to take on community members who are not yet there, who we would love to entice. But the demands of running the building day to day, I serve 1,200 students, okay? I don't serve a classroom or a couple of classes of 150 or have a caseload of 350. I serve 1,200 students. And the secretaries with one building serve 350 or more with one secretary. That is a huge caseload. They cannot now run classes and now take on selling their buildings. They do an amazing job. I'm so glad they spoke. You guys do an incredible work, and I'm so proud of you. And I'd like to see you continue your work, and I know that we cannot adequately fill their shoes. Thank you.
If people would like to leave, they can go ahead and leave. You don't have to, but you're welcome to stay. But if you would like to leave while we continue our meeting, now would be the time. Thank you for coming. We appreciate it. Trustees, at this time, we will move to the consent agenda that includes our personnel report, financial statements, minutes, our MHSAA membership renewal. So resolution 96 would be, could I have a motion to consider resolution 96, acceptance of the consent agenda?
I move to consider resolution 96, the acceptance of the consent agenda forward.
Moved by Amy.
Me and Amy.
I'm sorry, moved by Lori, seconded by Amy. Trustees, is there any discussion? No. Seeing none, all those in favor of acceptance of the consent agenda, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Congratulations to our new principals in the audience.
Yeah, welcome.
Welcome. Okay, moving into specialized instruction and student services, resolution 97, appointment of representative to the special education parent advisory committee.
I would like to move that Kristen Dillon be appointed as the parent representative to serve on the Special Education Parent Advisory Committee at the Oakland County Intermediate School District for the 24-25, 25-26, and 26-27 school years.
I move, do you need the resolution? I move to support resolution 97, appointment of representative to the Special Education Parent Advisory Committee.
Support.
Moved by Colleen, seconded by Nicole. Trustees, are there any comments or discussion? I'd just like to thank the parent who volunteered to step up to this role. Very much appreciated.
Mrs. Dillon is that's a newer family to our community, just been a couple years in our district. They have a child currently at Greenfield, and she's very passionately involved on all things inclusion and in support of anything and everything we can do for students that, or people of all ages that have challenges. So we're happy to have her. She is stepping in to replace one of our other PAC representatives who's not able to continue in the position.
If you could thank them both for us. Of course. Trustees, all those in favor of resolution 97, appointment of the representative to the special ed PAC, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Now we will turn it over to the teaching and learning reports. Resolution 98, awarding growth.
Yes, so I will be putting forth this resolution 98 for Groves and Seaholm High School. Actually, 98 is Groves, and I think there's a typo.
98 on the agenda is grows.
Yeah.
Should be gross. This is an annual resolution in which we confer the diplomas of our students. So if I can put forth to this board the recommendation of awarding the diplomas for Groves High School, Resolution 98.
I move that we approve Resolution 98, awarding of diplomas for Groves High School.
Support.
Any discussion? All those in favor of Resolution 98 awarding Groves High School their diplomas, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0.
And Resolution 99 is the same resolution except for is for Seymour High School.
I move to consider Resolution 99, awarding the diplomas to Seaholm High School students. Forward.
Support.
Any discussion? All those.
I'm just so glad my kid made it.
Congratulations.
Yeah, it was really
That was a
good.
big deal.
Really good.
Next year will be a big year.
Yes.
For many trustees on our board. All those in favor of awarding, Resolution 99, awarding Seaholm High School their diplomas, please raise your hand and say aye. Aye. Motion passes 5-0. This time, we will move into the business services report with Mr. Taratuta, and I believe first thing will be our bond quarterly dashboard.
Yep, so I'll invite Scott Smith and David Goldberg up to the podium to talk about what's been going on with our construction projects over the last 3 months and share some of that information.
Thank you and good evening.
Good evening.
Okay, and with me tonight is David Goldman. A lot of you guys haven't had the opportunity to meet David, but he's quietly, not quietly, but actively been working in the district, quietly to you, but been working with the whole bond team for probably almost a year, helping with all the work that's going on in the district. So he wanted to come and meet all of you, and you'll probably be seeing more of him as we move forward as well. But we're going to kind of split duties tonight and work through the report. We're like clockwork. We were last year in March, so it's June. So appreciate you guys giving us some time on the agenda. This is our typical format. So on the upper left, again, is kind of how we break down the bond. I know I'm a little bit repetitive, but for those listening in for the first time, you know, it isn't just about construction. There's buses and furniture and technology. There's so many great things that go along with the bond dollars that were approved by the voters. Up in our upper right is really the financial recap. And I'll just kind of touch on some of the changes since March. Our budget's up about $1 million, and that's really due to some great work from Kevin in the business office in terms of investing the bond proceeds. We're up about $1 million in net earned interest, and that's reflected now in the budget and part of our forecast moving forward. Our commitments are up about $8 million. Ironically, almost none of it is related to construction. About half of it is buses, which we approved recently. A big chunk in technology, and also some about $2 million in furniture for the high schools, Grove, Seaholm, and Lincoln Street. Our actual approves are up about $6 million. Most of that, again, is construction. That's about $2 million per month, but we'll see some bigger swings when we come back in March. As you can see, there's a lot of work going on here now that school's out. And then our owner's contingency is actually up about $500,000 from March. And the reason for that is we had been forecasting about $500,000 in earned interest, but because we're at $1 million, that makes up the $500,000 increase. So we're up right around $1.2 million in projected owner's contingency or unallocated reserve at this time. The bar charts are really just indicative of the numbers above, but probably our biggest changes in FFE, we were at 28% last time. We're nearly double that at 53%. Our buses were almost completely allocated out at this point. We passed the 50% plateau with technology and security, and our design prime is really, that's our roofing and paving projects. That remains unchanged, but that will start changing here this fall as we start to look at work for next year and the following year. In the lower right, this really focuses on our, In the lower left, I should say, these are our projects that are currently in design and planning, and I think it's worth noting there are plenty other projects in the bond here that still have yet to, start this process, particularly our 4 elementary schools that are newer in construction, being Pembroke, Greenfield, Beverly, and Harlan. Those will be more 2026 projects. So we're really just listing here the projects that are upcoming for next year. But again, we're hard at work at Bingham Farms with planning the new addition and the renovation scopes. We just met today, actually, with Principal McKinney to start reviewing finishes and doing some more planning. We're about halfway through design, and again, we'll be looking to bid that work out later this fall. We'll be bidding that with Corton Elementary and their interior improvements. Both projects are scheduled for next summer in terms of the renovations. And the new addition, we're still ironing out the timeline of that, but we hope to maybe start that next spring when the weather turns for us. A little bit of coordination that still needs to occur to make that happen. As I mentioned earlier, we're looking at our Design Prime project, so we've got a parking lot, new parking lot plan for Pembroke Elementary. There we go, starting out big. And then BCS, we've also got some selective roof areas over at that school, and that will predominantly be over the athletics area, the locker rooms, the gym, the kitchen, cafeteria areas. And Seaholm, we're looking at the athletics parking lot in front of the stadium there, off of Cranbrook, and also some replacement of the roof there above the auditorium. Similarly at Grove, some roof replacement above the pool. And over at Transportation, parking lot replacement there as well. That's a project we haven't really got too far into design yet. We're still trying to strategize how to best approach that large area of pavement. I won't steal some of David's thunder, but current projects, we've got really 5 bid packs that are actively happening at three to 4 sites, I will say. Seaholm athletic fields, those are predominantly done. We're really focusing on the practice turf field at this point. The retaining walls have now been installed. We're working on getting that work, try to be done by the end of August. Some of that work may linger into the fall with restoration of I'll call it the grassy areas that won't impact student use. Over at BCS, we're, again, hard at work still there. We started early. We've unraveled a lot more work here now that school's got out. Over at Groves, you've seen probably a lot of things as you walked in today, but where'd the front of the auditorium go? We've got parking lot work on the other side. Lots of great things inside. David will again share more of those and some photos as well. And Seaholm, similarly, we've got work outside, work inside, and again, some of the stuff is very visible as you drive by. And then thank you again for the approvals last meeting for the chiller over at Midvale. With your approval, we're getting that work, which is a long lead item, on order. We hope to receive that early next year, and we plan to get that work done in the first quarter of next year before the heat wave hits. With that, I'll turn it over to David. He's going to share some photos around the district.
Thank you, Scott.
All right. Nice to meet everyone. Thank you for having us. First, the project team would like to thank the board for approving the pull-ahead work that we were able to get started on before the summer. It's made it possible to make some great progress here before we let out for the summer. Some of those areas included the Groves corridor flooring throughout the school, the Groves and Seaholm restrooms, both for staff and students. We pulled ahead some work at Covington, including the pool area, the media center, and the cafeteria. And then as Scott mentioned, the west parking lot here at Groves. So that we really appreciate you guys approving that stuff early on so we could get a jump start on that. As you can see by the pictures, we had to add an extra page this month because we have a lot of progress going on. I think we had one of the best pictures that didn't make the report, but it was a school bus leaving Covington as the moving truck was pulling in. So Leonard took that picture, and it was just great to see that. And the cool thing is most of the major demolition is either completed or still in the final processes there. And as you can see in some of these pictures, the BCS classroom flooring has already gone in and it's already being installed. If you go into the 600 and 500 halls, a lot of those rooms have new flooring, so you can see that there in the center. We're doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes as well with new boilers at BCS, a lot of sidewalk replacements throughout the district. And what's funny is these pictures were taken Thursday and Friday and they're already outdated. So we're just making great progress. You can see that C-Home parking lot expansion as well. Since that picture, the lines have already been painted and people were parking in it today, so. And then,
Hold on.
yeah.
Is the C-Home parking, is that the one right behind the adult transition? That's
Ye-
where that one is?
Yep, yep, in between the softball field and the community.
And the C-Home baseball stadium looks professional.
Yeah, it looks great. And then you can see C-Home, the main entrance is torn out. I think that was done a couple days ago, so we're just making some progress on all of them. A lot of bathrooms have been refinished. You can see the Lincoln Street corridor, all the flooring has been ripped out, getting ready for new, and just some great progress throughout the 3 schools that we're working on. So we're off to a great start, and we're tracking really well.
What kind of new flooring is going to be going into the fitness room at C-Home?
I believe it's a combination of the rubber flooring, and then there is going to be a wood aspect of it where there was before.
A little bit of carpet.
A little carpet too, yeah.
That is great, looks great.
I was shocked at all the change from last day of school at Groves to this week. It's amazing.
Just picking up my kid from school one day, and then the next day, the whole front of Lincoln Street, I've seen it gone. Oh my gosh,
I didn't even notice it.
gone. It's like, yeah, there, one of them was.
I drive
So
by
you have to
like
go
3
back
times a day.
around to the back parking lot. Use the pool entrance.
This is great.
Yeah, it's
Thank you.
exciting, it's very exciting. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Next, we will move to Resolution 100, the authorization of the 2024-2025 property tax rates. I will let Kevin speak to this.
All right. Well, good evening, everyone. And thank you for those joining us tonight and those watching. So we are here tonight to fulfill a required conversation under Michigan law. And our goal for tonight is to provide a little bit of understanding around property taxes within our district and community. So it'll help to go through a brief history of the local property taxes and how it impacts school funding, the impact of school aid funding on our specific district, understanding the relationship between your property tax levy and the state per student foundation funding, and then we'll finish with a review of the proposed property tax levy. So a brief history of school aid funding. Before Proposal A, school districts in Michigan were funded primarily through local property taxes. And this system created significant disparities between communities. So, for example, the gap between the lowest and highest funded districts was nearly $7,000 per pupil, with the lowest at $3,398 and the highest at $10,294. In 1994, Proposal A was introduced to address these disparities. It shifted school funding to a statewide level, creating what is known as the foundation allowance. The school aid fund was established, funded by a combination of sales tax, income tax, federal revenue, property taxes, and a few other revenue sources. The goal was to minimize the funding gap between districts, and that goal was finally achieved in school year 2022, where all Michigan schools have the same base level of state foundation allowance. However, when Proposal A was passed, it actually put a cap on the maximum foundation allowance. And at that time, that would have meant our district would have lost out on a significant amount of funding. Therefore, communities such as ours were allowed to vote on an additional levy to maintain that higher level of funding, and this is known as a hold harmless millage. Currently, there is only 34 hold harmless districts in Michigan. So one of the key aspects of this funding is that the rate, or the hold harmless funding, I should say, is that the rate per student is fixed, and that can only be changed through legislative action. So what that means is that even though we benefit from additional per student funding, as the base per student rate increases, our sort of proportional allocation of that is of a lesser amount. And to put it into perspective, as an example, the base foundation rate increased in 22 to 23 was $458, and that was an increase of 5% on the base foundation. For our district, that same dollar amount increase was in reality only a 3.5% increase. A second example, but very similar, is we're projecting a $241 increase year over year, which is a 2.5% increase at the base rate. However, for our school district, that $241 really only represents an increase of 1.8% to our funding. To understand how local funding works in relation to the foundation allowance, it's probably helpful to think of it in terms of three different buckets of money. And the first bucket you can consider is your local property taxes. So this is the tax levy that's being proposed today, and that is the 18 mills that is levied on non-homestead properties. So this bucket, when we talk about student foundation and student per student funding, this is the bucket that gets filled first. And it's 18 mills again on non-primary residences. So you may hear me say non-PRE. PRE is just an acronym that stands for primary residence exemption. The second bucket to consider then is the state's contribution. So if the local property taxes are not sufficient to raise enough per student funding, the state then kicks in the balance of that. And I'll actually show how that works for us specifically on the next slide. And then for Birmingham specifically, we have a third bucket, which is our hold harmless component. Now this is, again, that flat rate of $3,755 per student, and that is that special hold harmless millage that is levied on homesteads and most properties within our district's catchment. So how it works for us specifically, and this is using estimates for the upcoming year, is the total amount of taxable value in the local property pool of costs at 18 mills is enough to generate $4,303 per student. The state would then provide the additional funding of 5,546 students, which equals that base foundation of $9,849. Now this would be our estimate of base foundation that all districts would get. And then, as I mentioned, there's that third component, the hold harmless, of $3,755 for a total estimated per pupil rate that we're projecting into next year of $13,604 per student. So what you see in front of you right now is the L4029, which is the form that we submit to the 7 municipalities that our school district is a part of. And I want to go over parts of this just to help the board understand how it's put together and some of the aspects of what that means, because it's important for the community to understand also certain aspects of how the property tax millage is calculated, how it works, and how we review it on an annual basis. So up at the top is, on the top right corner, is the taxable value of all properties within our catchment boundaries. And that amount comes from the county, and it's currently valued at $7.3 billion. The box beneath that is the taxable value of all properties that are non-homesteads. So essentially all commercial, industrial, other types of property. So that's $1.7 billion. Column 2 on this form represents and lists in each line the different types of millages that are being levied on the district, or from the districts onto the community. So the first line, which I know is really tiny print, they only give me so much space, is the operating all. And essentially that's the tax on all properties in that line. The line underneath that is operating non-homestead, so that's the tax that's being levied on only non-homestead properties. All the lines beneath that relate to debt service millages, so we have to levy a millage to pay off the community-approved bonds that we have passed, such as the 2020 bonds that Scott and David were up here just talking about the construction we're doing. So that is listed by different debt service payment that we're making, whether it's a refinance of debt or a issue that we're currently paying on. And I'll speak a little bit more on the total millage in just a minute. Column 3 is the date of the election, so when the community voted on it, just for reference sake. Item number 4 is the original millage that was voted on by the community. So in terms of the operating all line, that first line, the community approved 14.24 total mills of an operating millage on all property. Beneath that is the operating on homestead again, community approved 21 mills. The following column represents the total maximum allowable millage that has been reduced over time because of the Headley Amendment. And what the Headley Amendment is essentially that property tax values cannot increase higher than the rate of inflation. And if it does, then there's a fractional reduction of the millage in order to not generate excess revenues from the local community. So that fraction reduction is listed in column 6, and then column 7 is the sum of those two. And what column 7 represents is now the new maximum allowance. So you can see from column 4 to column 7 that what the community originally approved is slowly being eroded over time as there is a difference between the total taxable value and inflation. Item 8 for school districts will always be 1, so there's not a reduction there, and 9 is just a restatement of 7 because we have no reduction in column 8. There's a lot here, I know. Column 10 and 11 is essentially how we split the total debt levy for the upcoming tax year between summer and winter taxes. So for our operating millage, that total of 18 mills, we split it evenly between summer and winter taxes. For the debt service millage, because we have a payment in November and we need to generate enough revenue, we levy the entire 3.8 mills in the summer. The final column here is the expiration date of the millages that are authorized. So for that operating millage, what essentially that represents is the last date that this levy is allowed to be taxed. And before that, the community has to vote again to renew the operating millage. And that's important because as the operating millage is eroded because of the Headley Amendment, you essentially have to vote to over-levy the maximum in order to account for that erosion. So we take a look at this annually and we kind of project out when it might erode to a point that it's less than 18 mills. And the reason for that 18 mil number is because the state anticipates that we're going to levy 18 mills. If for some reason that operating millage is less than 18 mills or is not renewed, that would be a direct reduction in the foundation allowance provided to the district, essentially because we couldn't fill our local property tax bucket up based on what the state is essentially mandating for us. But current estimates kind of outline that the millage that has been approved by the community should sustain us through 2028. But our department in business and finance will continue to monitor this yearly and be in contact with the superintendent and finance committee should we need to accelerate a community vote and renewal. Just a few more other points for you. In the operating non-homestead component, as I've mentioned before, we're only allowed to levy 18 mills maximum. So even though it says 19, what the board is going to approve tonight is only 18.
And that's the number down here in this little box?
Correct. The sum of the two operating, again, is that 18. So in case you're sort of looking for little check figures, that's how that works out. And then the sum of all the different debt components is 3.8, which is the same millage we've been carrying for a number of years on debt service. And again, the total hold harmless millage is listed in the box down on the bottom. So in summary, I know this is quite a bit, the Per Student Foundation is really made up of two parts and three buckets. The state-based foundation is that first part, and the first bucket is filled by your local property taxes, that 18 mills. The second bucket is filled up by the state's contribution to get us to that base rate per student foundation. And then the second part of our per student funding is made up of hold harmless. It's also the third bucket of funding for our district. So what is in front of the board tonight for approval is the 18 mills that the state anticipates we will levy on non-PRE properties, that's our general operating millage, 4.8062 on homestead properties for the hold harmless millage, and 3.8 on all properties for the debt retirement millage. I will add, as a final point on this slide, that 4.8062 hold harmless millage is a reduction year over year, because as property tax values increase, less of a millage is required in order to generate that same $3,755 every year. Are there any further questions as I conclude this presentation?
Seeing none, trustees, could I have a motion for Resolution 100, the authorization of the 2024-2025 property tax rates?
I move to consider Resolution 100, authorization of the 2024-2025 property tax rates. And Mr. Teratuta, well done.
Thank you.
And Josie right there too. You guys, that's very impressive.
Second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor of Resolution 100, please raise your hand and say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes 5-0. Thank you.
Great.
Kevin, you can stay right up there.
Gonna do it.
Got
Here I
it.
am.
Final amended 23-24 budget.
All right, our next presentation that I'll go over is the final amendments for all of our budgets for fiscal year 23-24. As a reminder, we meet several times. We actually touch these budgets 3 to 4 times during the year. Now in June is our final amendment for this fiscal year, but it's also going to be the presentation of the first or original budget for next year. What has changed specifically in this amendment is the final adjustment to state aid. So that is always being adjusted throughout the year. And so we make revisions to our revenue for that. We have additional revisions to interest earnings. We clean up our estimates. And again, we always amend, excuse me, for transparency's sake, for fiscal stewardship, and just to help the board and superintendent with strategic planning. We're first going to start on this budget presentation for the recommended budget changes of our special revenue funds, our debt service fund, and our capital project funds. So we'll start with our ASD fund. This fund oversees our ASD Center program, and we have to submit a budget to the ISD regarding how many students we have, the staffing and supplies, and all the other various components of running this program. And that has only really been amended. We had an original budget that was approved, and now we just have this amendment here in June, representing the final amendment. So total revenues in the ASD Center program are decreasing by about $1 million from the original projection, primarily due to a decrease in enrollment from the original. Expenditures did not see a significant change over what we estimated, so the increase in operational fund balance was a decrease of about $1.1 million from 1.8 to $728,000. Below that line is the transfer into the general fund, so that is representative of the funds generated by the ASD program and then are paid to the general fund for rent and indirect costs. And ultimately, the center program has to maintain a 7% fund balance. So that $347,000 in fund balance end of year budget is a little over 7%. So we're maintaining that fund balance within the center program. In events where there are excess expenditures over revenues, that tends to impact that transfer into the general fund. So that number does decrease if there are instances where, expenditures are a little higher than estimate. Our next one that we'll look at is the food service fund. So this we've amended at least once during the year. Based on projection of food service and the number of students we are serving, that has increased $477,000 in total revenue. We did increase expenditures as well by $355,000, which is really represented by food costs. So the total operations, the people and the contracted service we have with Chartwells has not changed significantly, but because we're serving more students and providing more food, that is why we have an increase on the expenditure line for that fund. So you'll see that the anticipated decrease to fund balance is just over about $5,500, or it really break even for the food service fund. As I've mentioned before, the food service fund does have to maintain a set fund balance that is less than 3 months of average operating expenditures, and that $631,000 end-of-year fund balance is under that threshold. So if we were to be in excess of that threshold, we'd have to have a spend-down plan with the state, essentially putting more money into investing in our food service, but we are maintaining fund balance within that threshold. The Early Childhood Center and We Care Special Revenue Fund is next. So total revenues on this fund, we increased by $263,000 based on projections for tuition collections, as well as an increase in a transfer from the Community Service Organization Fund, which I'll speak to in just a second. Total expenditures increased $269,000 as we have increased capacity, we have increased need for supplies and staff, so that both increase in revenue and increased expenditures is really indicative of additional servicing. We did have to increase the transfer from the Community Service Organization Fund because without it, the Early Childhood Center and We Care Special Revenue Fund would have operated into a deficit position. So that operating transfer from the one fund to this fund is maintaining a positive fund balance. We are working closely with this program in order to bring it into a profitable position and hopefully able to then provide maybe additional revenue into the general fund. Following that is the Community Council Special Revenue Fund. So this is the fund that oversees preschool and kids club and contains the CSO program. That program revenue increased $270,000 over the last amendment, and total expenditures increased $171,000 over the first amendment for that budget. Because these two funds, the Early Childhood and Community Council Special Revenue Fund, do touch on early childhood, preschool, specifically preschool age and kids club, and they operate so much in tandem, that would be the primary reason why this fund is providing additional revenue to the early childhood fund in terms of that $218,000, which you'll see in one of those lines towards the bottom. So the anticipated decrease in fund balance is $437,000, bringing their fund balance at the end of the year to just under $500,000. Our student activity fund is our last special revenue fund. This really is an estimate of the collections for clubs and other student activity accounts, like your class of 2024 account kind of items. And then the expenditures that come out of that really should be equal to the revenues that come in, as that's really the intention of this fund and any sort of student activity funding. So we have updated the amendment to match more of what has been collected to date, as well as the expenditures coming out. Both of those have increased roughly $300,000 to $400,000. But you'll see overall, the excess revenues is only $40,000, so the fund balance maintains a consistency at about $1.5 million. The debt retirement fund is the fund that we hold for the servicing of all of our outstanding debt. The revenues are the property taxes that are collected, as I spoke to in the property tax presentation just a minute ago. And total revenues generated have not changed significantly over the original budget, nor have expenditures changed significantly either. We do know in this fund that the principal and interest is very predictable, so that's why there's no change there, and it's exactly at the mark as we expect. So the overall change, the overall revenues in excess of expenditures is $888,000 in this fund, bringing the year-end fund balance to $2.5 million. What's important to note about fund balance within the debt service fund is that we never want to either increase or decrease this in any significant fashion. We want to sort of maintain some sort of nominal amount, just in case property tax collections from one year to the next tend to be less than predicted. That's why we carry some nominal fund balance to help pay for those debt service millages. But you'll see in this fund that in 22-23, the actual was a decrease to the fund. This year's an increase. Next year, it may be a decrease, just to kind of keep that fund balance at that level. We work very closely with PFM, our sort of financial manager, who help us, with the calculations of property tax collections, how to distribute the millage between the different debts that we're paying, and making sure that what we're collecting is anticipated to pay off the debt service, which is kind of how we've structured the debt when the community votes on it. And then the last two funds I'll try and be real brief on are the capital projects funds. This is just interest income. We're matching that to the interest that's been earned to date. And the expenditures is all the construction spending that we kind of touched on that quarterly dashboard for the year in that particular fund. So over time, each of these funds will slowly dwindle down to zero as we spend out our capital project funds. And this is our estimate of where we anticipate it to be for this year. The board did approve and we did sell the final series in our 2020 bond. So we had to add the 24 bond revenue and expenditures budget. So we sold that final bond for $48.1 million, and we had about $190,000 in costs of that sale. So that's the only item within the budget for this year. Next year, you'll probably start seeing construction coming out of it. So we move on to the general fund and the recommended budget changes. So what the board has in front of them and what was provided to the board was a more detailed document of the next couple slides that outlines all the different sources of revenues and expenditures, as well as all of an explanation for all the changes. the presentation tonight is going to cover much of these at a high level, mostly for brevity, but the board does have a detailed version in front of them. So what we have in front of us today is, or on this slide, is revenues as we change from Amendment 2 to the final amendment. So our second amended budget was a total amount of revenues of $147.8 million. That's been revised up to $149.7 million, a change of $1.8 million. A few items of note just to identify is the changes in other local and intermediate sources both relate to interest earnings and changes in fair market value on our investments. So as the board is aware, and as I know others have spoken to about this before, but we do have some long-term investments that we have to essentially mark to market. And as the fair value of those change, we just have to track it under the current accounting standards. Now, when we had the original budget for those, we anticipated fair market to decrease as a conservative estimate because it's hard to predict what the market is going to do. So we wanted to be safe in our budgeting and make sure we were accounting for it appropriately. Fortunately, as these investments reach closer to maturity and as interest rates have sort of stabilized for a while, we felt comfortable moving that fair market value adjustment from $275,000 of loss to zero, essentially. And because we don't anticipate a loss on fair market value. So that 275 is represented in that intermediate sources line. And then our current cash holdings have outpaced our estimate for interest earnings by about $300,000. Our state-sourced revenue increased by about $1.5 million, and there's a number of items that are represented in there, but I'll touch on some of the most significant ones. The first is 147A, which anytime you hear 147 followed by a number, it is somehow related to the pension system. So 147A specifically is the cap the state puts on districts for how much any individual district is contributing into the retirement fund. And that cap is just under 21%. But total retirement costs for an individual could be up to 30%. So 147A represents the difference in that 21 to 30% that helps the schools pay for these pensions. So that increase this year was $884,000 in this amendment. Our student learning and inclusion team was able to procure a literacy improvement grant from the state. So the amount that we anticipate on spending this year is about $300,000. That's new revenue, new expenditures. So no general fund impact, but it does show up as an increase to state funding. We did get an increase in the state grant for our psychologists and social workers. So that grant is called 310, or that's how it referenced as 310. It helps to offset a lot of the payments because of COVID. There was a big need for additional psychiatric help in districts and other mental services. That's what this was anticipated to pay for, but it's being phased out over time. So we were fortunate to actually get an increase in allocation this year, but I only mention that because this is the last year of that grant. So all the costs that this has been helping offset in the general fund does come off in the future, in the next year's budget, which again, I'll speak to later. But that increase for this amendment was $291,000. I think that covers everything, all the major stuff out of revenue. In expenditures, so changes from our second amendment to final, we increased total expenditures from the second to final amended budgets by about $600,000. You'll see in salaries and benefits, salaries increased about $200,000, benefits increased about $600,000. We do, every time we are looking at budgets and tracking every month, we are looking at trends just to make sure that what we have put in is aligning with the payroll that is being issued. And for the purpose of information, it's important that as we budget, when we are audited, our total budget has to be more than what actually is paid out. So that $150.8 million, we expect to not fully spend out, because if we did, that would be a finding on our audit, and the state essentially, kind of gives you a slap on the hand if you are under budgeting. So what we do is we essentially make sure that we are properly budgeting for all different components. That being said, that really is the explanation for why we have increased both our salaries and benefits. We've looked at trend analysis. We determined that it was important to add some budget to those to make sure that we are properly accounting for all of it. The materials and supplies increase of $300,000 is related to the grant that Student Learning and Inclusion was able to procure. So we saw that in state revenue. Here we see it on the expenditure side, and it's related to the ELA pilot that is rolling out. So they're purchasing some of the materials now, so it's in teachers' hands over the summer. And then there was a decrease of about $500,000 in capital outlay. That specifically was related to, we had budgeted some capital projects, and fortunately, we're able to use bond funding to offset use of general fund dollars into the bond. So we were able to scale that budget back. So what that means from the original, so what you have in front of you is the fund balance change from the original to the third amended budget. So the title of this slide is a bit of a typo. The total decrease in fund balance was an improvement over our second amended budget. The second amendment budget showed a deficit spend of $2.3 million. The final amended budget is showing excess expenditures over revenue of $1 million. That $1 million really represents 0.7% of total operating expenditures for the year. So I would say, a close figure as we look, so even though $1 million to most people sounds like a large pot of money, the total representation of the $150 million budget we have is close to the mark, let's say. Fund balance as a percentage of expenditures will be also improved to 12.22%, based on an estimated fund balance at the end of the year of $18.4 million. And so that will conclude the presentation of the final amendment for the fiscal 23-24 budget.
Thank you. Trustees, are there any questions before Kevin moves into the projected 24-25 budget? No, I don't. Helen or Amy, just as our finance committee members, do you have anything to add?
Well, obviously, we heard from several CSOs tonight. You can tell from this budget that despite cuts we've made in the past, we are still showing deficit here. And, Kevin's going to move into our 24-25 budget. See some more of this, so, listen, I recognize that 0.7% is essentially a balanced budget, but we do still continuously struggle to get to this place every year, and that is why, as we move towards a balanced budget for 2027, we need to be cognizant of this. And, we need to keep in mind that $1 million, when our fund balance is $18 million, would put us in not very good shape in the next 10 years. And we have increased our total revenue and expenditures by about 13 million this year, Kevin. And since I've been on this board, probably by about 25 million, which affects the percentage of our fund balance. Because obviously, even if we have a very minimal spend down, it's still going to more negatively impact the percentage that we have. So, trust me, it pains me to hear from CSOs. I have worked with CSOs for years. I mean, when I volunteered in the office at Covington, in my role with SOS, I recognize the value they add to our schools, to our students. But as we look at our budget and look at ways to create efficiencies and create revenue, we also really try hard to keep cuts away from students. And again, that is not saying that the CSOs aren't adding to overall student life and community, but they are still in our schools. We did not eliminate CSOs. We did eliminate hours. And, you know, we hope that they can continue to add value in the 20 hours. So.
Thank you. Trustee Zama, anything? I mean, I will just echo everything Amy talked about. We talked about all this at the committee level in great detail. One thing that we've been talking about too is what we see here, the projected decrease in our fund balance. When do we get our audit result? When do we do the audit and get the results?
Our audit is mid-August, and I am optimistic that we'll have an October presentation of audit results.
We talked about, I know it's more work, which we can help with, going back over the years, and I know you've done it on kind of an informal level, actually looking at the difference between the projected numbers and then the actual audit findings, because the audit findings have been, I'm happy to say, for most years, much better than what we see here. So, while we don't want to see this, we also want to think about the final numbers, and that's something that we need to consider as well.
I mean, and even after June 30th, for this budget, we might know something better than $1,053,000. But yeah, the audited numbers, we won't know until the fall.
Thank you. Thank you. Trustee Spencer, anything? Okay. I just, I would just like to echo too, that I appreciate all the CSOs. I value what they bring to our community, and appreciate their presence in our meeting tonight. And just as a part of our job as trustees is being financially sound, and we as a board have asked for a pretty lofty goal in balancing our budgets. So although we can't predict our future, we're consistently looking at ways to improve and assess our financial situation. So I appreciate them all coming and voicing their concerns tonight. Thank you, Kevin.
Yep, no problem.
Trustees, now we'll move into projected 24-25 budget.
Well, I know it is getting late. I will do my best to get through this. Obviously, there are more changes here than there were in the prior budget. So what we are going to cover now is the 24-25 projected original budget for next year. So we'll start with some budget assumptions. Our enrollment blended rate currently is 7,312 students. Based on the statistical data that we were able to generate from a consultant, as well as reviewing our internal enrollment and projected enrollment based on historical knowledge of how our enrollment trends. We are, for now, anticipating a decrease of about 40 FTEs. FTE stands for full-time equivalent students, which is how the state provides funding to school districts. So it's not necessarily representative of 40 students, but a fraction of, all students, a reduction of 40 for next year. As Dr. Roberson spoke to, we are estimating that the increase in base foundation will be $241 from $9,608 to $9,849, and our hold harmless funding will continue to remain at $3,755. We spoke in great detail about the tax levies. Those have no change or very minor change in the case of hold harmless, but again, that hold harmless change does not change the amount per student we are getting. In federal grants, we are seeing the final sunset of our COVID-related grants. So that's about $1.35 million of total grant funding that will be coming off of both revenues and many expenditures. A lot of the costs related to these COVID grants were supplemental in nature. So that was additional tutoring, additional supplies, stipends, those kind of items. Those were non-recurring costs, so those don't continue into the future as those grants sunset. In wages and benefits, based on the parameters that were approved and the contracts that we approved last summer, we're budgeting for about $4.5 million of increased wages and benefits. And then based on the budgetary adjustments and efficiencies that we've worked towards, a total reduction of overall expenditures of $2.7 million. One other major item of note, because I'm going to talk about it a lot, is the community education program, which is a lot of our after-school enrichment activities, and you get a large pamphlet of class information a couple times a year out of community ed. They're currently in the general fund, but from an accounting perspective, it makes a lot of sense to actually pull them out of the general fund and move them into their own special revenue fund. And the reason for that is the general fund really should be accounting for instructional K-12 operations. And the community education, while it does provide a lot of enhancements to instruction, it does have its own self-funding revenue stream. So we are able to classify it as a special revenue this year. So what that means from a budget perspective is that there is a reduction of $2 million of revenue and $1.7 million in expenditures from the final 24 budget to this opening sort of 25 budget. So we'll start with the general operating fund because there's a number of changes to walk through there, and then we'll go through the other special revenue funds in less detail when we get to that point. So total revenue changes from 24 to 25 are a decrease in total of about $2.8 million. That $2.8 million decrease is made up of the different items you see in revenue, so our operating millage and other local state grant-sourced revenue. Operating millage revenue is up $2.5 million. That is the sort of additional millages that's going to be provided by the 18 mills on local property taxes. And that's just a function of as property tax values increase, operating millage revenue is going to increase. The other local revenues is a decrease of $1.7 million. The primary reason for that is that pull out of community education, that $2 million that I had mentioned, moving to its own fund. So of that $1.7 million, the vast majority of that comes from moving community ed. State source revenue has quite a number of changes. And so again, similar to what I did in the prior, I'll go through some of the most significant items. We are going to see a reduction in a state categorical called 20F. That was some categorical funding because 10 years ago, the state slashed budgets, but then they provided a little bit of offsetting money that has continued for 10 years. All the proposals coming out of all the different legislative and branches of government are showing that this particular categorical is going to sunset. So 50% this year, 50% next year. That's a decrease of $362,000 year over year. Because we are anticipating a decline in enrollment, we are going to see a new categorical, which we didn't see this year, which is Section 29, the enrollment stabilization. So the state will provide funding to districts that are experiencing enrollment decline to help smooth the change year over year instead of having to bear the brunt of the loss of foundation immediately. That allows you to take 50% of last year's blended count, 50% of your next year's blended count, and merge those in order to not see such a significant decrease. So we're anticipating that that to be an increase in state funding. Your board packet says 465, but that was based on a prior revision. It's a little over 200,000 based on the 40 student decrease. We had a one-time payment this year, Section 27L. That was the Educator Compensation Program. That was $335,000 that was provided to us for 23-24, but is not being renewed for next year. Section 31AA and Section 97, which is mental health and safety grants. Current estimate is that those are going to be reduced by 50%. So that is a total reduction estimated to be $1.3 million out of state revenue. As I mentioned in last year, we are getting 35J, which is that literacy improvement for the ELA pilot program. That's actually an increase in revenue of $412,000. We also received a grant, 23G, My Kids Back on Track. That's to increase proficiency in math and reading, so that will be where a lot of our tutoring dollars will go. That's $545,000 of increased revenues. And then the final item of significance, just to point out, is Section 31O. Again, that is the psychologists and social workers. We had total revenue of $404,000 in the 24's budget, but that program is sunsetting this year. That is that decrease of $404,000. And then again, with our grant funding, you do see that $1.6 million. That really is representative of the net change of the sunsetting grants and any changes in allocations of either new grants at the federal level, of which I don't think there are many, or if any, and then the adjustment to the current and ongoing grants. So then we move on to changes in expenditures. So our 23-24 budget projected $150.7 million of total expenditures. Our 24-25 opening budget is estimated to be $149.8 million, which is a reduction of $882,000. A couple items just to note, we did speak about it at the front end of this presentation, but total increase of wages across all applicable groups was $4.5 million. And then of the $2.7 million of budget efficiencies and adjustments, $1.9 million is represented in the salaries and benefits line. So the sum of those first two lines, that increase, is the total increase less the budget efficiencies that we have spoken to. We're also seeing a very large decrease of $2.3 million out of purchased services, and that primarily is a function of pulling community ed out of the general fund and moving it to its own special revenue fund because they use a lot of vendors, and those costs are all represented in that purchase service line. Additionally, as part of our budget adjustments and corrections, there are a number of items that have been reduced in that budget line. Similarly, in materials and supplies, that's about $921,000 of reductions. Again, part of our ongoing efforts towards operational stability. We did cut a number of material and supplies budget line items going into next year. So what that means in terms of fund balance, if you take the total revenues and other financing sources of $146.8 million and the total expenditures and other financing uses of $149.8 million, we are looking at excess expenditures over revenues of just over $3 million. So we're projecting a fund balance as a percent of expenditures of 10.29% into 24-25. Now, before I continue, one thing that is important, just as we've said before, but as a reminder, these original budgets that we put out are based on a significant number of estimates. Those estimates being the foundation increase per dollar, what our enrollment is going to be, and other factors like that don't necessarily get the limelight in these budgets, but how much of property taxes may be abated through tax tribunals and a number of other estimates that we have to carry. And so when we do these original budgets, we want to be thoughtful and conservative as we go into the future so that we are planning appropriately for how we will operate as a district into the future. So I say that to say a lot of this is estimate. And when we get to that first amendment in November, December timeframe, that's when we have a much better understanding of how many students we have, what the foundation is, and it does shore up a number of estimates that we've put together. So I say that just to point out to the board and to those listening that when we have that $3 million sort of put out there as operating expenditures over revenues, it is because we try and be conservative in our estimates and to be thoughtful in our planning for the next year. As Dr. Roberson has expressed as well, that if there are other revenues that we are optimistic about coming, we don't choose to put them in because really until we have guaranteed money, it's unwise to put those in the budget at this time.
Can I just add something? The legislators are considering whether or not to give us additional money. In the conversation that we've had, and I'm sorry I put it in my mouth because of my allergies, the conversation that we have had around the budget and funding is not unique to Birmingham. Public education needs to be funded at the appropriate rate and to keep up at minimum with inflation. So if you are so inclined to reach out to your legislators who are right now talking about the state budget, please let them know that we need them to invest in public education, because an investment in public education now for our students has so many gains to our economy, nationwide and statewide. So if you can reach out to our state legislators, that would be really helpful, especially this week, because they are continuing to have those conversations.
So before I move in to some of the other budgets, sorry, I have another slide on future outlook. So as I talked about, these original budgets are based on conservative estimates. Statewide, there's an enrollment decline, so we think about that, we plan for it, we project for it, but also keeping in mind that there's an inflationary impact as we talk about our contracts, whether it's with our unions, with our vendors, utilities, healthcare, all those items. We don't have clarification right now on our state budget. So we do have to be probably more conservative than we might otherwise be if there was some alignment in how the different branches of government were proposing different things, but on some they agree and many they have different allocations. So we try and tend towards the more conservative options as we budget. And then we do have continued progress towards balancing our budget. So the strategic plan timeline is by fiscal '27. We continue to explore additional revenue opportunities, increase operational efficiencies, and maximize the use of the grant funding that we can. Okay, now before I get into all the special revenue and debt service, was there any questions on just general fund? Okay. Can always change your mind at the end. All right, try and get through this quickly. ASD Center program, we're anticipating total revenues of $4.3 million, total expenditures of $3.7, an increase of fund balance of $600,000, and then a transfer to the general fund, which would then leave a fund balance at the end of the year of just under $300,000. Again, representative of 7% of total expenditures in that fund. So that fund changes year to year based on enrollment and based on the servicing level required. We do interact with Laura's department and the county to make sure that we are putting that budget together. Community service. So obviously, I have spoken many times about pulling this out. It is now here as a special revenue fund. Obviously, we had nothing in prior years in terms of an actual budget for this. So 24-25 will be the original budget. We are anticipating $2 million of revenue, $1.8 million of total expenditures for an increase in their fund balance of $271,000. We anticipate being able to transfer over to the general fund $210,000. Again, usually out of special revenue funds, that's rent, indirect costs, profit sharing, those kind of items, leaving them a fund balance projected for next year of $61,000. Food service fund is estimated really to continue the same level of service year over year, so not a significant change in their budget. And the total decrease to their fund balance is only projected to be $2,000. So another break-even year projected for food service. Early Childhood Special Revenue Fund. What we have done with this fund, because you'll see an increase of $1.8 million in revenue and $1.1 million of expenditures, is we have elected to streamline accounting and the way that we look at early childhood programming, especially preschool and kids club. We have elected to combine both the Midvale We Care program from an accounting perspective and the building preschool and kids club into a single fund, because the reality is they sort of operate under the same umbrella of cost, and that being preschool age students or school age children, but sort of extracurriculars that have their own derived source of revenue. So that's what this represents.
So, I'm sorry, so this is Midvale,
We Care.
The
Former,
individual school preschools,
yes,
and did you say kids club?
yes. Yes, so we, from an accounting perspective, we're still able to disaggregate the information of, what's Midvale, what's We Care, what's the building level items, but we're just combining it into one fund. And because we're combining it, we're bringing that balance of fund, that remaining fund balance from the community service fund into this fund. So that is represented in that second line, that $500,000. So between total revenues and total expenditures, and then a transfer into the general fund of $100,000, there's anticipated to be an increase in fund balance of $547,000. Student Activity Fund, again, we track revenue and expenditures. This budget just represents what we anticipate going into next year for student activities and clubs. Debt retirement, revenues are what we estimate for what is being collected on that 3.8 mils, $27.2 million. We have total expenditures of $27.7 million this year. So as I mentioned before, there's actually going to be a decrease in this fund balance of $445,000 maintaining that $2 to $2.5 million fund balance that we try and keep in the debt service fund. Last two funds to get through are capital project funds. We're just anticipating $1 million in interest revenue, $27.9 million of construction. So you see that we will have a ending fund balance of $4.8 million or so as we're getting close to using up all of those fund dollars. We would then move over in our construction to the 2024 bond revenues. We will probably start using up some of this money during the course of the year, so we're anticipating about $7 million worth of construction activity out of this fund. Generally, as we start new projects, like the projects that are ongoing would be in the 23 bond project. New projects are going to start coming out of the 24 bond project, which is why we'll see it here. So that started out at just under $48 million of fund balance. We project to use about $6 million, leaving a fund balance at the end of the year of $41.9 million. And we're done. So I know that was a bit of a marathon, but for the 24-25 budget, I know we've spoken a lot to our estimates and other items. As I conclude, are there any final questions?
I do have a question for moving funds with Kids Club, the one that you were just talking about, the early childhood, when we're moving Kids Club. Does that mean that CSOs would no longer be overseeing Kids Club?
There's no,
now, or do we have that figured out yet?
there's no change in the programming, the way that the programs are currently run.
Okay.
We're just moving them into a single
Separate
fund.
fund.
Yes.
That's consolidated.
I do need to just make a clarification. One, in that fund is only the elementary CSOs, is that correct? Or are secondary CSOs in there?
Yes, the secondary CSOs have been accounted for previously in the community council fund. But one of the questions that we've received is just related to revenue generations and how special revenue funds are accounted for. So the secondary CSOs are moving to the general fund.
And then the second thing is that with the reduction in CSOs hours, there will have to be some changes in duties and to accommodate for the changes in hours. So I just want to clarify, I know you were asking a specific question about the budget and will programming run as usual. There has to be some changes when you're reducing hours. And so we will be working on that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Kevin.
You are welcome.
We're all going to send some letters and say some prayers.
That would be great.
They're still, my understanding is that a lot of the debate is around the MIPSRS money, about how much to give schools. There is still a great push to, again, give that 7% and 3% to employees, which, again, employees and the school districts actually funded the retirement at a greater cost, I think about 10 years ago. And so the push is for that, now that it's overfunded, to give that money back to the school districts and to educators. And so that's the biggest hope.
Trustees, any other announcements for this evening? Seeing none, we will adjourn at 9:09.
Well done.
Yes, thank you.
So a lot of information.